Welcome to Tavern Archery. I'm Johannes von Hammersbach, and after a day on the archery field, we come into the tavern, grab a pint, sit down, and talk about all things target archery. Prost. We're back in the tavern today with Master Godric of Hampton, from the Barony of Enderwald, from the Kingdom of the East. And Master Godric is going to show us today how to make arrows, from arrow blanks to getting arrows on target.
For staining. Okay, so we've got our shafts all taped now where the cresting is going to go. And before we put the stain on though, we're going to wipe them down because there'll be some sawdust residue on the shaft, and you don't want that on there while you're trying to stain your shaft. So I'm just going to wipe them down really quickly, like so. And I'm just using a terry cloth towel. And I don't know if you can see this very well, but there's all kinds of stain right there from the leftovers of the sanding. Here we go. So now I'm going to go ahead and put this on. So I've wiped them all down now. And now I'm going to start the staining. Now, as I said, this particular set, the top part or above the blue, that's going to be a kind of a medium stain. Right now what I'm using is Mimwax penetrating stain, and I'm using golden oak. Wearing vinyl gloves here so I don't want the stain all over my hands. And again, using a piece of terry cloth, or you can use a piece of cotton, some kind of soft material. I'm going to take the shaft, take my terry cloth, I'm going to dip it into my stain right here, and I'm going to hand rub that on there. And I'm going to go all the way down to where my tape is. So here we go. I have a nice medium color golden oak, and I'm smoothing it out, and I'll put it into my stand to dry, and I'll continue to the next one. And we're going to do that same step over and over again until we've done all 24. Once we're done with the 24, we'll turn them over and we'll put the lighter stain on the other side. Alright, so now we have the upper half of the shaft stained, and now we're going to use the same process, obviously with a new towel, new rag, with a different color. This time I'm just going to use the penetrating natural stain. It should give the wood a little bit of a tint to it, but you'll definitely be able to see the grain through it, and it'll be very light, so it'll give you that darker, lighter look on the shaft. And so again, the same thing goes. I'm going to grab it by the tape end. I'm going to dip my towel into the stain, and I'm going to rub the stain on. Now, as you can see, it's not changing the color of the shaft very much, just a little bit. And so I'm going to make sure this is on there as smooth as I can get it. And now I'm going to put it into my box, and I'm going to continue on. I'm going to grab the next one and do the same thing. Just rotate it around all the way up through to the tape again, to the bottom part of the tape. Again, this natural stain just barely gives it a hint of color. So one more, and we're going to do the same thing. A little more stain on my towel here. Here we go. And I'm going to continue the same process throughout the other thing, and then I'm going to let it sit so that both sides dry completely. And then in the next step, we're going to then start our cresting. We'll take the tape off and we'll start the actual cresting of the arrows. All right, so the next phase in our arrow making process is to crest them. We have let the stain sit overnight, so make sure that it's dry. We then take the tape off that we put on to mark where we're going to crest the arrow. And then we set up our cresting jig. This is a spin right. You can see it very well, but it has a motor that spins the arrow along with some dollies to keep it from wobbling. And you can set where you want it on the jig. It has a tape measure here in the front so that you can keep. I've set it up so that I've got one edge of where I'm going to crest on a 2-inch, and then the other edge on 3.5. So that way, each one that I set in there, I can use those marks as reminders. There's also will be a little bit of bleed through from the stain. That's perfectly fine because we're going to cover that up with our cresting. The cresting paints, they have cresting paints. This one is True North Arrows. They come in sets of in a little 2-ounce jars, if that's what you want. You can also use craft paint or even modeling paint like I do here. I have some paint that I use for painting miniatures. The reason that I can use any of these kinds of paints is because we're going to put the finish coat or the urethane over the top of everything so it will seal it in. So the first thing I'm going to do is I have to have a cresting pattern, and this particular set is going to have a cresting pattern with a thin black line, a wide yellow line, a thin blue line, a wide yellow line, and a thin black line. So to make this process a little easier, and the reason that I used an 1.5 inch piece of tape to kind of keep the stain out of, is I'm going to paint this entire thing yellow. And then I'm going to put my thin lines on it after the yellow has swung. But we have a problem with yellow because yellow is really a thin paint. Things see through it a lot. We're going to put down a base coat of white first. It extends the process a little bit, takes a little longer to do it, but the yellow then comes out really bright. If you don't, then you end up having to put 2 or 3 coats of yellow on in order to make it work. So I'm got a little paint palette here, and I'm going to put down the white. And so I've got my spin right jig set up. I'm going to use a wider brush because all I'm trying to do is cover between the 2 and the 3.5 inch with the white. So I'm going to turn my motor on. As you can see, it's spinning. I'm going to take my white, and I'm going to start at one end and then gradually drag my brush to the other end. And I just want a thin coat of white. I don't want it very thick. I want to make sure that I'm stopping at the 3.5 inch mark, and I'm going to go back over it to smooth it out the rest of the way. And as you can see, I have my white coat on there. I'm going to let this dry, and then we will then put on the yellow coat. We will let that dry, and then once it dries, then we can put on our thin black lines, which are going to be, the black lines are going to be on the end, and right in the middle there'll be a thin blue line. Here's a little closer view of how I'm doing the cresting. As you can see, I've got my arrow in the jig, and I know that I'm going to start at 2 and go to 3.5. So I've got my jig all set up. So I turn my jig on, and with a little bit of practice, as I just touch a little bit and I drag my brush across, a little bit of practice, this gets to be really easy, and you can do, you know, one coat of on 24 arrows in about 20 minutes. And that's about the length of time it takes for this water-based paint to dry, so that you can put on the second coat, or you can put on the stripes. Now, as you can see, I'm going back and forth over it to smooth it out as best I can. because we don't want any ripples or lumps in it when we put the next coat on. And so I move on to the next arrow, put this in my arrow box, and we move on to the next one. Okay, so we're back and we've allowed sufficient time for drying of the white stripe. Now we're going to put the yellow stripe on, and we're just going to do this very same thing we did with the white. We will put our shaft in the jig. Again, I'm using a wide brush because I'm doing a large area. And then we just follow right over the top of the white. That way now the yellow actually stands out pretty well. And again, I'm starting and then I move to the edge. And then again, this takes a little practice, but it won't take you very long to be able to start cresting your own arrows. There are many different cresting jigs out there that you can get. I use this one because it holds the arrow and allows for it not to, if it has a slight bend in it, it doesn't allow it to wobble all over the place. But again, many different Fletchers use many different jigs and paints, and mine is not the foremost way of doing it. It works for me, and when you are doing your own arrows, whatever works for you, whatever product you want to use, whatever jig you want to use. But the process is basically the same no matter what jig or product that you use. So I'm going to continue on and put my yellow stripe on my arrows, and then when this dries we'll come back and we'll do the smaller stripes. Okay, so now that we have the yellow on our shafts, we're now going to put the accent colors on. We're going to put the black on either end and the blue in the middle. I've reset my jig up a little bit so that I can actually add the lines. Now I've marked where the middle is supposed to be in between these two, and it's on all of my shafts and bolts that I make. I have it's kind of like a signature thing that I do, and it's underneath the feathers up here where the feather is going to go. I put 3 small silver lines, and so I've got them marked here at 7 3/4, 8 and 8 1/4. So I'm just going to, this is kind of like a signature, although many other Fletchers use similar techniques to accent their arrows. And so there, I have my signature. That'll go be underneath where the feather sits. And so I'm going to do this process all at the same time, making it go a little bit faster. So I'm going to set my blue line, a little paint on my blue, and I'm going to line it up, and I'm just going to touch it because I want to draw a thin line. And I'm just going to hold it there until I get a consistent circle all the way around. And now I'm going to take the black and we're going to put that on either end. And again, the same process is you're going to hold it right where you want it until you get a consistent circle all the way around. And here, and I'm putting it right on the edge where the yellow ends. And then, again, putting my little 3 little silver. Again, it's kind of just a, kind of like a signature thing for me. Little accent color here. And it's just 3 silver lines. Once the feather's on it, it's barely noticeable. I mean, you can see it if you're looking at it closely. But that's going to end our cresting. I'm going to finish up the rest of these, and then from here we're going to move on to putting the urethane on, and that's dipping. So that'll be the next part of this program.
Thank you, Master Godric, for showing us the fundamentals of arrow making. We look forward to seeing you again in the tavern. Prost.
They long had shot so well, and no wonderful truly. They spend time gathered here, they spend time gathered here in tavern archery.